In a higher education environment, I believe that students are more likely to feel engaged in protests. They are likely to feel more affirmed and encouraged to engage in faithful witness and protest, and even in some sense instructed, taught that faithful witness and protest is paramount to the living out of the faithful witness of the gospel.
I hope I will ask myself, gee, should I be part of this? Should I be out there? I know recently I was part of a protest, and I went out there in my clerical collar, and I immediately met a person who had to tell me about how she had been abused by the church and her description, and hurt, and what was I doing out there? And I said, well, because I'm the church you should have met. I'm sorry you went through what you went through. But it's fun when you get out there and people may be surprised you're there with them and say, no, I'm a Christian. We do this kind of thing all the time, and I want to stand with you. I want to enlarge your view of the Christian faith. But so I think that is important. And one thing I loved about being a campus pastor was that it was almost like, hey, you're mad with your parents, you're angry about the course of the world. Great, Jesus loves to work with that. He will ride in on that and use that to his advantage. And so I hope we'd see the protest as a possibly God-given opportunity.
So one of the practices on campus that we've instituted are a series of conversations. Our Dean of Students has set particular spaces aside for conversation. Our students have said they don't need another talking head program. We have plenty of those. We have we don't suffer for a lack of wonderful people to come in and sit kind of up on stages and talk about how to talk to one another. But what our students have really been looking for are places to engage in real dialogue, practice good habits of talking with one another. So I think one of the really critical things that campuses need when it comes to having critical dialogue on campus is a commitment to a full representation as best they can of different kinds of perspectives, different kinds of life experiences and stories, but also really accessing what students have spoken to in terms of their needs and their desires for their learning community. And sometimes those aren't formal programs. Sometimes those are making sure that spaces are carved out on campus in informal ways for students to have those opportunities. One other particular way that we've engaged dialogue on campus was in the days after the election. I and various other faculty members simply made ourselves available to students if they wanted to debrief. And so I had a student contact me, organize a group, and we just sat one afternoon and I asked them two questions. What's changed since this election? And I asked them what hasn't changed. And in that conversation, we heard from a lot of folks who had anxiety around the results of the election. We had as well as prospective student who in fact felt incredibly empowered and emboldened by the recent election and what that would mean for her community. So we started with a commitment to hearing one another, to listening, as our Dean of Students says, with an assumed grace. So listening, beginning with the position that we assume you are looking to bring your best self. Sometimes that isn't always the case. People don't always bring their best selves. And as we navigate those waters, we again model with students ways of hearing, listening, and challenging appropriately, inviting into conversational space. And so far, that seems to have been bearing fruit. What we know as well, though, and I think many campuses would agree, we're right in the thick of it. So we're struggling with some of this too. In some ways, these are old divides. In other ways, these are new. It's hard to escape, we have to remember. For our students, it's hard to escape these dialogues into safe spaces. It's not that we turn off the evening news at night and it's gone. It's on our phones, it's in our social media, it's in the headlines, in the billboards printed around us, especially if you live in the South. You're not short on billboards with various political proclamations, right, and theological proclamations. So the inability to escape that heightens everything. Everything feels more important. Everything feels more immediate. And so one other thing that folks can do as they think about dialogue with students on campus is knowing that this will have its own rhythm, that even though everything feels immediate, for some people it's the end of the world, for some people it's the beginning, that this is a process that goes in incremental steps and requires perhaps steps back and steps forward as we go along.
Great.
Sure.
Thank you.
So I think it depends on the campus policies. So I wasn't there on campus, but at the University of New Mexico, there was actually a white male who had a gun in our student union the night after the election took place on November 8th. And the way that was taken care of is that they closed the sub down and made everybody stay in a safe spot because they weren't sure what his intentions were when that happened. And so they ended up arresting him, and they found more firearms and more things in his vehicle, yet he wasn't even charged with anything, which is really interesting because we have a gun-free zone on our campus. But there are policies in place, and if there's an active shooter on campus, if there are violations of sexual harassment or hate and racism. So there are places to report that, and I think we as administrators, faculty, and even staff, we need to know what that means and what that looks like, but also students need to know that there are venues for them to be able to report things, but also that they have people that are there to support them.
Well, Jesus certainly seemed to be one who was on the edge of things. He always went into the margins to be in solidarity with those that were shunned or rejected, most vulnerable in society, just as the Spirit of Christ goes into that which is most shunned within ourselves, that we put into the margins of our own being. So it's living the gospel. If there's a protest, if this is about social justice and about love and equality, human dignity of all people, that's about honoring the sacred worth and the divine that dwells in all people and beings. And that is a universal spiritual wisdom, understanding. And so the church should have every bit of interest and compassion and a need for greater understanding with why these protests are going on. And also the church should care because we need to offer hope. And if we want young people to care about Christianity and the relevance of religion, I mean, we've got a hemorrhage problem. I'm hoping that this becomes an opportunity for young people to say, well, maybe there's something right about the church. You know, when you've got 500 clergy at Standing Rock, or when the church starts standing up for environmental concerns, for Black Lives Matter, for people who are most vulnerable, then all of a sudden that gets their attention. That shows that the church just might be relevant, and that's how you're going to get young people into the church. I really do believe that's true.
Thank you.
They need hope too. I mean, this is not a time to go it alone. This is not a time to go it alone, and that includes with protest. I called my daughter, you know, after the election. She's in Kansas City, and please do not go out after dark. You have no idea what if someone next to you is going to be using nonviolence or not, and you can get caught up in something. So you need to. It's too difficult to go alone in terms of how hopeless it can feel. You need that spiritual underpinning, and you need to get things done, and that happens in groups of people. So the religion of me, myself, and I is not going to get us very far. We need to be in community, and that includes in community organizing.
My faith has been forged in the crucible of living as a woman of color, a Black woman in American society, a society that has not always welcomed my people, my ancestors, my mother and father, my grandparents, me. And so the faith that I have teaches me that though it may not look like what I want it to look like now, or even what God would have the world to be now, that there is a better day, a brighter day coming but that I am not called to sit and wait on it. I am called to work for it and work toward it, and to work with other persons who are like-minded. And so my faith propels me on to see that which may not be now, but God is certainly calling us to in the future. Thank you.
So the one thing I guess that I would like to talk about is that I think it's really an obligation and duty that each of us has being a part of the United Methodist Church to be able to demonstrate and show others that we care about what's going on in their lives. We care to support them by learning. And I think, we have to learn every side, right? Maybe we don't agree with certain people on a certain thing, but we also need to understand what their lived reality is like. In order to be able to understand them. And so I think a part of our commitment should be to learn and to be a part of the support of those who are feeling unsafe right now, and especially in the months to come. I think we definitely need to show our solidarity with people who are going to be threatened, not only in their livelihood, but also in the services that are provided to them. Because there's a very big likelihood that a lot of the funding and all of the services that are there for people right now is going to be dissipated or is going to be very minimal. And so I think we also need to figure out how can we also be a resource for those individuals too.